Dr. Conrad Schetter has been an Afghanistan expert for the past 20 years, and he has been working at the Center of Development Research for the past decade. Welcome you to this talk. We would like to start this interview with a question about the upcoming conference, which will take place in Bonn next week, 10 years after the first Afghanistan Conference. Representatives of around 80 countries are expected to participate. What are your expectations of this conference?
I think in general we have to say that these conferences are just a kind of a snapshot of diplomatic talks. This means we can't expect that this conference will change the whole situation in Afghanistan and that we will flip from war to peace within one day. The other thing is, of course, that this conference has a strong symbolic value. Just remembering that the first conference in Afghanistan took place here in Bonn 10 years ago, and also perhaps to underline that it is carried out, at least hosted by Germany. This underlines again the important role Germany plays in Afghanistan, where it is, because it doesn't have a legacy of colonies, still seen as a kind of a neutral partner. What I expect from this conference is a kind of a trust building. I think what we can observe between Afghanistan and the Western countries, international community, but also between the Afghans and the neighboring countries, is that there are a lot of mistrust and a misinterpretation of action. So I hope that this kind of conferences will help to build a kind of trust, and hereby also to make clear what will be the commitment of the international community towards Afghanistan after 2014. I feel that this is the most important step to take by the international community.
There are a lot of critical voices about this conference, saying people talk about peace, but in fact we have had a war now for the past 10 years and nothing will change really. What is your opinion about this?
There's some truth in it. So Afghanistan witnessed in the last decade many conferences, and they rather changed anything within the country. So I think we have to understand that one conference will not change the world for sure. This means that we have to think much more in processes. And I feel that this conference could become one milestone in a long-term process for peace building in Afghanistan. So I see that the main significance of these conferences is to build trust among the partners, trust among the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, as well as with Afghan politicians. So here we have to see much more the long-term goal to reach peace in Afghanistan.
So what is going to happen if all the international troops are going to withdraw after 2014? Afghanistan falling back into the Middle Ages and Taliban country, or is it going to become a democratic society like we can see now in the Middle East? What are your expectations? I
think that's a crucial question, how it should go on in Afghanistan after 2014. The first thing, what is still not clear, is to what extent international military will stay in Afghanistan. And here there are still the negotiations between Afghanistan and America going on, and it looks like that the Americans will still continue to have one or the other garrison air base in Afghanistan. So I hardly feel that we will observe in 2014 a full withdrawal of the NATO and of the American troops, but some will stay in Afghanistan. The other question is how it will continue in Afghanistan. There's many things to mention. The first thing is, what I'm really pretty aware of or afraid of, is that we currently can observe a strong militarization of Afghanistan. This means that many Afghans are buying weapons, that we can observe that their militias are coming up, that even also the Americans are channeling some weapons to militias and also some other, especially neighboring countries. So what worries me is that we can observe this militarization of the country, which could mean that we see just a prelude for a new phase of war in Afghanistan. Second point, what I think it will look like, that it depends very much on how much money will be, or how many funds will be channeled into Afghanistan after 2014. If the world will keep their eyes closed regarding Afghanistan, I'm afraid then we will see again a civil war. On the other hand, what you also could observe in Afghanistan's history several times, as long as their money is piped in, the ones who are ruling the country can buy their own, or let's say they can rent their own networks of warlords. There's a saying in Afghanistan, you can't buy an Afghan, but you can rent him. And that's the way how it works in Afghanistan. So what we can observe, as soon as the money is drying out, then Afghanistan is really facing conflicts. Third, I think it's important to see that we hardly can expect a state building of Afghanistan within 1 decade, or even believing to democratize the country within the next 20 years. If you look back to the elections we already had in Afghanistan, there was a lot of fraud in these elections. I would say that from the past election, more or less, the voter turnout, 90% was faked and perhaps 10% was real. So we got really face a strong problem with democracy in Afghanistan. And this we can't change within 1 or 2 decades. This is a process that will take much longer.
Yeah, the country is facing a lot of challenges. Let's get back to the conference in Bonn next week. Are there any scientists participating, or is it a pure political meeting? It's
a pure political meeting, that's for sure. What becomes clear is that there's certain partners, for example, also the Federal Foreign Ministry, that they asked some scientists, some academics in the last weeks for their recommendations. But the conference as such is a pure diplomatic one. There are, of course, some other conferences going around, which are parallel taking place, especially on civil society issues, but the conference as such is without any academic support.
The latest news says that Pakistan is withdrawing its participation in the conference after NATO attacked Pakistani territory. What are the implications of the Pakistani withdrawal of this conference on the conference and its expected outcome?
The rejection of the Pakistanis to join this conference has a tremendous impact on the outcomes of the conference. Just going back a couple of months, the main idea of this conference was to start a reconciliation process with the Afghan government and the Taliban. In the last months, we could observe that the Taliban were rejecting these conferences, having many attacks in Afghanistan, showing very strongly that they have not any keen interest in this conference, and that they would even not only boycott the conference, but perhaps even sabotage this conference. That Pakistan is now also not participating is so important because everyone believes that the Pakistanis are the only one who have an influence on the Taliban. The main goal of this conference, of this reconciliation process, is now coming to an end. It's not working. Without Pakistan and without the Taliban, the whole question of reconciliation cannot really be addressed in this conference anymore.
So this has weakened the whole process tremendously.
This tremendously weakened the whole process. So this is why I feel that now the whole process will shift much more in the direction what will happen after 2014. Much more to questions about what will be the Western engagement in Afghanistan after 2014. What might be here the important steps in this transition phase. Also much more the question perhaps also a chance for the conference that it will much more shift to economic questions. How Afghanistan can economically stabilize. Perhaps also the question of the whole drug economy. As you might know, Afghanistan produces more than 90% of the global opium. That this question will come up much more. So I feel that on this conference there we'll observe a shift in the themes. And this perhaps will shed light on some themes which were not so much discussed in the last years because they all stand in the shadow of this Taliban issue.
Yeah, the Taliban issue. Let's talk about your latest book, It was published just recently. It was published in German. It's called The Taliban Complex. And there are several contributions, but one of the main messages also you convey is that the West has been focusing on the Taliban and on the cliché of the role of the Taliban in Afghanistan far too much. So if this is your thesis or your hypothesis, what is the real picture? How should we look at Afghanistan or at the Taliban if you say this is all a little bit?
This is, of course, very difficult to answer because it's highly difficult to do research on the Taliban. I mean, with all this kind of guerrilla movement, it's very difficult to study them, to study the material. So you have to draw back to what they are publishing officially or in the internet, some talks, some key informants. This is the main problem. Why I had the idea about this book was when I was about 2 years ago, stayed in the headquarters of NATO in Kabul. And I was surprised how little knowledge there existed about the Taliban, and how bad and as well as misinformed here not only the military but also the political advisors were about Afghanistan. And indeed, we could observe, or I could observe, that they very strongly believe in certain stereotypes, such as like the tribe, like the militant Islamists, and so on. There's of course a truth in it, that you find certain tribal structures, you find also certain militant Islamists. But of course, reality is much more multiple, much more difficult to understand. And this is why we brought in this book authors together who more or less from different perspectives reflect on Afghanistan. And the outcome was quite interesting, just to show, for example, everybody believes that Taliban are, for example, a medieval or even a Stone Age movement, just to show, for example, how Taliban are using modern media, especially the internet, for their own propaganda. I think this is something nobody is really thinking about. The other thing, I think, what I learned in this book, in one contribution, the author shows how the Taliban are addressing certain values, certain Islamic values, which have a general meaning for Afghans across the country, and hereby how they are even able to bring their propaganda to people who are not any extremists, but who just believe in Islamic values. So I feel that in this regard, the book helps somehow to shed light on certain aspects of the Taliban which are usually not addressed.
And it sounds like a very interesting and very relevant book to the current political debate. When is it going to be translated into English for all the NATO people who will be German?
I hope soon, but I have to indicate that most of the authors are also publishing in English. So it's the way how it is today, that you publish always in 2 or 3 languages. So nevertheless, I hope that we will also see soon an English translation of this book.
It's a reassuring message for our audience. Yeah. Thanks a lot for this interview, Mr. Schetter.
Thank you.